The alien warship loomed in the darkness of space, its sleek hull reflecting the cold light of distant stars. Inside, Admiral Xylan stood at the center of the command deck, his claws tightening against the control panel as he read the latest battlefield report. The humans had done something unexpected, again. He had seen their desperation before, their refusal to surrender even when facing overwhelming odds. It was almost admirable. Almost. But this was beyond belief. They made a warship out of what? Xylan's voice was sharp, his disbelief evident. His second-in-command, a cautious officer named Rilvek, hesitated before responding. A cargo hauler, sir. A civilian vessel, long decommissioned. They've modified it. Xylan's mandibles clicked in irritation. Humanity was a young species, reckless and stubborn, but nothing they had built before had ever been a match for the Threk's Dominion. Their fleets were outdated, their technology crude compared to the Dominion's precision-engineered war machines. And yet, every time the Threk's fleet pushed forward, the humans refused to be crushed beneath their heel. They adapted. They survived. He turned to the glowing holographic display, zooming in on the ship in question. It was ugly, its structure jagged and uneven, patched together like a child's crude attempt at a battlecruiser. The ship's hull bore scars from previous encounters, layers of mismatched plating welded onto its frame. But the worst part, the part that made something cold settle in Xylan's chest, was that it shouldn't exist. The USS Ironclad had been a transport vessel, a deep space freighter meant for slow, uneventful supply runs. The Threk's archives had listed it as abandoned, left to rust in the remains of a forgotten shipyard. And yet, somehow, humans had dragged it back from the grave, reforged it into something dangerous. Reports indicated that its hull had been reinforced with salvaged alien armor, Dominion armor. The humans had ripped apart fallen Threk's vessels, repurposed their own enemy's technology, and made it their own. More reports poured in. The Ironclad had obliterated a Threk's scouting fleet. 5 ships, all state-of-the-art Dominion crafts, wiped from existence in a single engagement. There had been no distress signals, no survivors. Just silence. And now, the ship was coming for them. "Open a channel," Xylan ordered, his tone measured but firm. "I want to see what kind of fool commands that monstrosity." Static crackled through the bridge as the connection stabilized. A moment later, a human face appeared on the screen. The man was older, his features lined with years of battle, his uniform worn but unmistakably military. A deep scar ran along his temple, disappearing beneath his short-cropped hair. He leaned forward, a slow grin forming as he met Xylan's gaze. "Admiral," the human greeted, his voice calm, almost amused. "You look surprised." Xylan narrowed his eyes. "Your ship is an insult, a disgrace to warfare." "Funny," the human mused. "That's what your fleet said, right before we turned them into space dust." Xylan clenched his jaw, refusing to rise to the bait. "You cannot win this war. That ship is a temporary inconvenience. The Dominion will crush you." The human chuckled, the sound low and confident. "Maybe. But first, let's see how well your fleet holds up when an insult comes knocking." The screen cut out. A warning siren blared across the command deck. "Sir," Rilvek shouted. "The Ironclad is advancing, fast." Xylan turned sharply toward the display. The warship, if it could even be called that, was barreling toward them at impossible speeds. Its massive frame should have made it sluggish, an easy target. But the humans had done something else, something that defied logic. They had rebuilt its engines, overclocked them beyond safe limits, turning the ship into a battering ram that could tear through a fleet before anyone had time to react. "Fire on sight," Xylan commanded, his voice steady despite the unease coiling in his gut. The Threk's warships opened fire. Plasma beams lanced through the darkness, colliding with the Ironclad's hull. But as the smoke cleared, the ship was still there, untouched. Xylan's breath caught. Impossible. Then, with a deafening roar, the Ironclad's railgun fired. The void of space shuddered as the Ironclad's railgun unleashed its payload. The shot tore through the battlefield like a spear of pure destruction, a projectile moving so fast it left a faint, burning trail in the vacuum. Xylan barely had time to process what was happening before impact. A Threk's destroyer in the Ironclad's path took the full force of the blast. One moment, it was there, a sleek, deadly war machine, built with the finest Dominion engineering. The next, it was reduced to a cloud of debris, its core obliterated in an instant. The shockwave rippled outward, slamming into nearby Threx vessels, sending them reeling from the unexpected power. Silence fell across the command deck of Xylan's flagship. No one spoke. No one moved. Every officer present had just witnessed something that should not have been possible. A human vessel, built from scraps and desperation, had just one-shot a Dominion warship. Xylan's claws dug into the edge of his console. "Damage report," he snapped. "Sir," Rilvek said, voice tight with alarm, "we lost the direction. 2 other ships sustained heavy damage. Shields at 60% fleet-wide. That railgun should not have done that." Xylan knew that. A railgun of that size had limits, energy constraints, heat dispersion issues, wear and tear on the barrel. A standard human warship would be lucky to fire once before the whole system needed a full recalibration. But the ironclad had fired and was already moving again, adjusting its trajectory like a predator preparing for the next strike. Xylan forced his thoughts into order. Their modifications must be extensive. They've reinforced their reactor, maybe even stolen Dominion tech to compensate for energy loss. His mind raced through possibilities. Had humanity discovered a way to bypass conventional railgun limitations? Were they using a hybrid power source? Nothing made sense, but he could not afford to be caught off guard again. "All ships spread formation," Xylan ordered. "Keep your distance. The ironclad is not a brawler. We will dismantle it from range." The fleet adjusted, slipping into precise, calculated movement, positioning themselves to surround their target. This was how the Threx fought, methodical, overwhelming, superior. No matter how terrifying that weapon was, the ironclad was still one ship. But even as his fleet moved, something felt off. The ironclad wasn't retreating, wasn't scrambling to recover from its own attack. No, it was doing something far worse. It was charging again. Xylan's eyes flicked to the power readings. The ship's systems were spiking, its railgun preparing to fire far sooner than should be possible. No cooldown. No downtime. The humans had built something that could withstand the very force of its own power. That was not human engineering. That was desperation twisted into innovation. "How are they reloading so fast?" Rilvek asked, his voice carrying the same disbelief that clung to Xylan's thoughts. "They found a way," Xylan muttered. "And if we don't stop them now, they'll use it against us again." He made his decision. No more hesitation. "Full barrage," he commanded. "Hit them with everything." The Threx fleet responded instantly. Plasma bolts, torpedoes, ion disruptors. Every weapon at their disposal opened fire in unison, turning the battlefield into a storm of lethal energy. Explosions erupted across the ironclad's path, drowning the warship in fire. No matter how much armor the humans had bolted onto that ship, nothing could withstand this level of firepower. And yet, when the flames cleared, the ironclad was still there. The armor was scorched, plating torn in places, but the ship was still coming. It refused to stop. Xylan felt something creeping into his chest. Not frustration. Not anger. For the first time in his career, it was fear. The ironclad tore through the battlefield like a nightmare given form. The damage it had taken should have crippled it. Its hull was fractured, parts of its plating burned and twisted from the relentless barrage of Threx fire. And yet, it pressed forward, engines burning like dying stars. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Xylan watched, his mind struggling to grasp what he was witnessing. The ship shouldn't be functional. No warship, especially not one built from a cargo hauler, should have been able to withstand this. But it wasn't just enduring the assault. It was hunting. Another warning signal flared across the command deck. "Sir, the ironclad is adjusting course." Rilvek's voice was tight with urgency. "They're locking onto the Vralis." Xylan turned sharply to the display. The Vralis, one of the Dominion's most advanced battleships, was shifting position, attempting to evade. It was heavily shielded, its armor leagues beyond anything the humans had ever faced. There was no logical way the ironclad could destroy it. And yet, deep in his gut, Xylan knew what was about to happen. "Order the Vralis to break formation." Xylan barked. "Now!" Too late. The ironclad's railgun fired. A moment stretched into eternity. The shot tore through the Vralis's shields like they were nothing. The ship shuddered, its outer armor buckling then. A deafening explosion. The battleship erupted, breaking apart in a chain reaction of fire and metal. The wreckage spiraled into the abyss, the flames lingering far longer than they should have in the void of space. The Vralis, one of the Dominion's finest warships, was gone. Silence gripped the command deck. Xylan couldn't breathe. This was impossible. His fleet had never suffered losses like this, never to humans. Humanity's ships were supposed to be inferior. They were supposed to run, not fight. But the ironclad wasn't running. It was hunting them. Xylan's claws pressed into the console, his mind racing for an answer. How had they done this? How had they taken something so primitive and turned it into a weapon capable of killing Dominion warships? And then, a terrifying thought took root in his mind. What if this wasn't the only one? He turned to Rilvek, his voice low but edged with urgency. Check intelligence reports. I want every human shipyard scanned for similar modifications. If they've built one of these, they might have built more. Rilvek hesitated. Sir, if they have more, then we may already be. The ship lurched suddenly. Lights flickered. A deep rumble vibrated through the flagship. Xylan's head snapped to the display. The ironclad had not fired again. Something else was happening. A new signal flashed across the console. A transmission. Xylan hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to ignore it, to focus on the battle. But something about this moment, about this ship, demanded his attention. Patch it through, he said. Static crackled. Then a voice, gritty, laced with exhaustion but unshaken, filled the bridge. You're wondering how, aren't you? Xylan's blood ran cold. It was the human captain, the one commanding the ironclad. How a bunch of primitives took your tech, twisted it, made it better. The man continued, almost conversational. How we turned a dead freighter into a warship that's tearing through your fleet. Xylan's throat tightened, but he forced himself to respond. You're playing with forces you don't understand. That ship is a fluke, an accident of luck. The human laughed. No, Admiral, he said. That's what you don't get. You think we built this thing out of desperation. He let the silence hang for a moment. We built it because we knew this war was coming. We built it because we knew you would never stop. And now you're finally seeing what happens when you push humanity too far. Xylan's pulse pounded. This wasn't just about one ship. This was about all of them. Before he could respond, a new alert flared on the display. More human ships were appearing at the edge of the battlefield. They weren't standard military vessels. They were freighters, transports, old haulers, modified, their energy signatures burning like small suns. The humans hadn't built just one ironclad. They had built an entire fleet. Xylan stared at the display, his mind refusing to accept what he was seeing. More ships, dozens of them, emerging from the void like ghosts. Their hulls were mismatched, reinforced with scavenged plating, their engines running hotter than any sane engineer would allow. They weren't built for beauty. They were built to survive. The Dominion fleet had always seen humanity as inferior, a species barely capable of keeping itself alive, let alone waging war against an empire that had ruled the stars for centuries. But now, staring at these twisted, repurposed war machines, Xylan felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. Sir. Rilvek's voice wavered. They're hailing us again. Xylan's claws tightened. He knew he should not accept the transmission. He should give the order to fire, to wipe them out before they could make another move. But deep down, he already understood the truth. This battle was no longer in his control. Patch it through, he said. The screen flickered. Once again, the human captain appeared. His face was still calm, still carrying that quiet confidence that made Xylan's insides twist. This was not the expression of a man on the losing side of a war. You're taking this well, Admiral, the captain said, tilting his head slightly. Most would be panicking by now. Xylan forced his mandibles to stay still. He would not let this human see any sign of weakness. I will not be drawn into your mind games, he said. Your fleet is nothing but scrap metal held together by arrogance. We will grind you down until there is nothing left. The captain only chuckled. That's what you don't get, he said. You think you're fighting ships. But what you're really fighting is us. Xylan didn't respond. You've always had the numbers. The tech. The resources. And yet, you still can't break us. You've thrown everything at humanity, burned our colonies, destroyed our fleets, crushed our armies. And every time we come back stronger. The ironclad and its fleet of cobbled-together warships continued their slow, unrelenting advance. Xylan's ships repositioned, spreading into a new formation, but the usual confidence in his officers was gone. The bridge had fallen silent, every Threx officer staring at the display with a growing sense of dread. Do you know why we built these ships? The captain continued. Not because we had no choice. Not because we were desperate. We built them because we knew one thing about war that you never did. Xylan felt the answer before it was spoken. It's not about who has the biggest fleet. It's about who refuses to lose. The line cut out. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the humans opened fire. The ironclad's railgun fired first, launching another devastating slug that tore through a Dominion battleship, splitting it in half. At the same time, the modified freighters and transports, dozens of them, activated their weapons. Their guns were crude, a mismatched collection of stolen alien tech, but they worked. And in the hands of humans, they were deadly. A Threx frigate took a direct hit, its shields collapsing instantly as human torpedoes found their mark. Another ship tried to retreat, only for the ironclad to surge forward, slamming into it head-on, tearing through its weakened hull with brute force alone. Xylan's fleet, for the first time in history, was in chaos. "Admiral," Rilvek's voice was borderline frantic. "Our forces are breaking apart. They're not following orders." Xylan's mind was racing. This was not how the battle was supposed to unfold. The Threx never lost control. And yet, in mere minutes, the battlefield had turned into a slaughter. The humans had turned old freighters into warships. They had taken wreckage and built a fleet. And now they were winning. Xylan gritted his teeth, forcing himself to think. There had to be a way to turn this around. The Dominion did not lose to humans. He refused to believe it. But as another explosion rocked his flagship, Xylan was faced with a terrifying realization. What if it was already too late? Xylan braced himself as another explosion sent tremors through the command deck. Warning lights flared red across every console. His fleet, his unstoppable Dominion fleet, was being torn apart by human ingenuity, by sheer refusal to die. He could hear his officers barking frantic orders, but it no longer mattered. The battle had shifted. They weren't in control anymore. The humans had taken it from them. But something wasn't right. Xylan narrowed his gaze at the tactical display, watching the chaotic battlefield unfold. The ironclad was relentless, carving through their forces like a beast that refused to fall, but the rest of the human fleet, those scavenged warships, were moving in a pattern. A formation. Not just attacking. Hurting. His eyes flicked to the outer edges of the battlefield. That's when he saw them. More human ships. Not freighters. Not salvaged wrecks. Something else. At first, they barely registered on the scanners. Silent, cold objects drifting at the edge of the war zone, too small to be a threat. Then one of them moved. A flicker of energy pulsed along its hull, its shape shifting as hidden panels snapped into place. A second later, it was fully online. Armed. Ready. Xylan's claws dug into the armrests of his command chair. Cloaked ships. The humans had cloaked ships. His mind reeled. That was Dominion technology, something humanity should have had no access to. How had they developed it? More importantly, how long had they been waiting? "Rilvek," he barked. "Scan those ships now." Rilvek was already ahead of him, his claws dancing over the control panels, but his mandibles twitched in uncertainty. I don't understand," he stammered. "They weren't there before. We scanned this entire sector." Xylan's mind raced through the implications. The humans had let them see the ironclad. They had let them believe the warships were nothing but modified freighters. All the while, this fleet had been hiding in the dark, waiting for the perfect moment. And now that moment had arrived. A new transmission came through, but this time, it wasn't the ironclad's captain. The voice was different, colder, sharper. A woman's voice. "Admiral Xylan," she said, her tone calm, almost amused. "I hope you're ready for the real fight." The transmission cut. Xylan barely had time to react before the cloaked ships opened fire. One of his destroyers vanished in an instant, ripped apart by an energy weapon unlike anything he'd seen before. Another warship tried to reposition, but the human fleet was already ahead of them, their hidden vessels striking in precise, coordinated attacks. The Dominion was losing faster than before. Xylan refused to accept it. "All ships, pull back to defensive positions," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to regroup." But the humans didn't give them a chance. The ironclad surged forward, now backed by an entire hidden fleet that had been waiting for this moment. The battle had already been tipping in humanity's favor, but now it was a massacre. Xylan's mind raced through every possible counter-strategy, but there was no pattern to exploit, no weakness to strike. The humans had played them perfectly. And then another alarm. Xylan's eyes darted to the new warning on the display, and for the first time since the battle started, his blood ran cold. A new ship had just entered the system. It was not human, and it was not Dominion. The war had just gotten much bigger. Xylan's breath caught in his throat as the new ship emerged from the void. It wasn't human, nor was it Dominion. It was something else entirely. Sleek. Monolithic. It dwarfed even the largest ships in his fleet, its hull a deep obsidian that seemed to drink in the light around it. Symbols unfamiliar even to his vast knowledge of interstellar civilizations glowed faintly along its surface, pulsing in a rhythm that felt eerily alive. For the first time in his life, Xylan felt something worse than defeat. He felt insignificant. The humans must have seen it too, because the ironclad's advance stalled. Their cloaked ships held position, their weapons primed but not firing. Everyone was waiting. Then the alien ship spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in a presence, a force that pressed against Xylan's mind, pulling at his thoughts, his fears, his understanding of the universe. You are not worthy. Xylan barely realized he had collapsed to one knee, his claws trembling against the cold metal floor of his bridge. His officers were in similar states, some frozen, others gripping their heads in agony. The voice, if it could even be called that, was inside them all. He turned his gaze to the screen, expecting to see the humans just as broken by the force that was overwhelming his mind. But they were standing tall. The ironclad's captain, the man who had been so calm, so unshaken, took a single step forward, his eyes locked onto the alien ship. Then in the silence he spoke. Then make us. The alien ship moved. Faster than anything Xylan had ever seen, it blinked across the battlefield, its form shifting, warping, as if space itself was bending to its will. A pulse of energy ripped through the void, striking the ironclad's shields. They held barely. Xylan's mind raced. The Dominion had spent centuries conquering, evolving, adapting, and yet he could already tell. They had never encountered anything like this. But the humans had. The ironclad counterattacked, launching a salvo of weapons that should have done nothing against something so advanced. And yet, the alien ship hesitated. It didn't dodge. It didn't phase through reality the way it had before. It was hit. Xylan's mandibles twitched in disbelief. The weapons the humans had pieced together from wreckage, stolen tech, and sheer defiance had hurt something beyond their understanding. That's when it clicked. The humans had planned for this. They hadn't just built a warship out of scrap because they were desperate. They had done it because they knew something was coming. They had been preparing. Xylan's claws gripped the armrests of his chair. Rilvek. His voice was hoarse. The humans, they weren't fighting to defeat us. They were practicing. Before Rilvek could respond, the alien ship lashed out again. Another pulse of energy surged forward, but this time, the humans were ready. The ironclad moved like no ship should have been able to, twisting in space, avoiding the full impact. More human warships followed suit, their crude, improvised designs proving more adaptable than the Dominion's rigid, perfect engineering. The battle was no longer about Threx versus human. It was something far bigger. Xylan clenched his fists. He had spent his life believing in Dominion superiority, in the idea that their empire would last forever. But now, standing at the edge of something far greater than war, he realized the truth. The Dominion had already lost. Not just this battle, not just this war. They had lost the future. And humanity? They were just getting started. Xylan sat motionless in his command chair, watching the impossible unfold. The battle that had once been a clear Dominion victory had transformed into something beyond comprehension. Humanity, the species they had underestimated, the so-called scavengers, had not only turned the tide, but had wounded something greater than either of them. The alien vessel, though still overwhelming in size and power, was no longer invincible. Its dark, shifting form flickered at the edges, unstable, as if it had never expected resistance. The humans, battered and outgunned, refused to stop. The ironclad, scarred from battle but still standing, led the charge. They were fighting not just to survive, but to prove they belonged. Xylan knew there was no victory for the Dominion here. Not anymore. If they stayed, they would be destroyed, not by the humans, but by their own arrogance. They had believed themselves to be the rulers of the galaxy, yet they had never once questioned what lay beyond their wars and conquests. Now that question had been answered. "Order the retreat," Xylan said, his voice quieter than before. His officers hesitated, stunned by his words, but Rilvek, still gripping the console, slowly nodded. Within moments, the Dominion fleet began pulling back, warping out of the system one by one. Xylan didn't move. He kept his gaze locked on the battlefield, watching as the humans continued their relentless assault. He should have felt rage. humiliation, the disgrace of a battle lost. Instead, he felt something strange. Respect. The ironclad's captain, still standing at the front of the bridge, watched him too. Even through the distance, Xylan could feel it, a silent understanding. The Dominion had been defeated, but the humans weren't gloating. They weren't conquerors. They had simply done what they always did. They survived. Xylan turned away from the screen as his ship finally jumped into warp, leaving the battle behind. He didn't know what the future held, but one truth was certain. Humanity had changed everything. The war was over, but something far bigger had begun.